auditing, keeping books, running a city is very difficult in a normal year, but it's particularly difficult when you're dealing with a pandemic. On page 1 of the handout, I'll kind of go through some of the numbers here. I'm echoing a little bit, sorry.
Can you all mute your microphones? I think what's happening is it's coming in on your mics and then going back. Go again.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
You won't know for a few seconds.
At any rate, on page 1 of the handout, like I said, the audit did go, it went very well, particularly considering we were in the middle of a pandemic, or we're still in the middle of a pandemic. We kind of give you some general information, some select financial information, going back to 2012, coming forward to 2021. The line that I've highlighted there, the first highlight down, it's kind of blue. You'll see that unrestricted or unassigned fund balance, that's within the governmental funds, if you will, and that's all going to be within general fund. It's dropped off quite a bit from about $1 million to $88,000 at the end of 21. I will tell you that your transfer from the electric fund was $4 million in 2020. It dropped to $2.8 million last year. And you also transferred about $1.3 million to the water fund that you did not transfer in the prior year.
Will you pull your mic up a little closer to your
Sure.
face? Thank you, sir.
So that's leading to some of that decrease. You did receive CARES funding of about $2.4 million. And I can tell you that this fund balance, unassigned, unrestricted, does not include any money from ARPA, which you're going to get, or you've gotten, I think at this point, about $8.2 million. So that has not been factored in here. That's going to show up next year. And we just got a ruling, and I sent it earlier today. The final rule came out, and there seems to be kind of a loosening of the requirements in regards to claiming that for revenue replacement. So it looks like they're really going to make that easy for the city. Won't necessarily have to document that you had lost revenue. You'll be able to assign up to a minimum amount or maximum amount. You'll just be able to accept as revenue replacement. Long-term liabilities, we list those out below. Those are going to include all outstanding debt, including pension liabilities, post-employment benefit liabilities, basically all your long-term liabilities. Ended the year at $70 million. And you can see on a per capita basis, kind of that gray line near the bottom, you stand at $4,003 per capita in debt. That compares to a state average for cities of $8,045. Most cities don't have a big university. So we do have to take that into consideration. And one thing I scheduled out new this year, Radford University enrollment, and I scheduled out just the main campus enrollment. They have on their website, you can go to a page and you can look at the main campus enrollment every fall. And you can see how that's dropped off. Back in 2012, 9,000 students were on campus. In 2021, for the fall semester, we're showing 5,700, or they were showing 5,708. We talk about all these numbers, but that's a big number because that's going to drive really a lot of the local revenue that you receive in terms of sales tax, meals tax, lodging tax, and so forth. That's also going to generate revenue for water and sewer, electric. So that's probably the most important row on the page. Unrestricted cash balances, excluding the school board and the EDA, stood at $6.7 million. That's down from about $8.9 million. Again, we don't have any ARPA funds in there, so we're going to see that number shoot up next year.
Right. That's just what I wanted to point out for folks that saw the $88,000 and the lower number there, that actually, once we get all that work done, moving some of those numbers around, it's likely to be even larger than what we had before. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we'd expect to see, particularly if you use it for revenue replacement. So, and I would encourage that because, you know, unrestricted or unassigned fund balance it's just too low. It needs to be higher. The next page, I'm showing you, and I'm going to scroll down. Okay, there we go. The next page, and I don't know if they can see this.
They can.
Out in the internet world, but this is just showing the enterprise funds, and this is showing the net position for each fund. Net position is total assets of a fund minus total liabilities of a fund. So obviously you want that to be positive, but do keep in mind that's not necessarily cash available for spending. It's going to include the depreciated value of your assets. So it's just giving you a picture kind of over time of how these funds are doing. You can see you ended the year, the total for the enterprise funds, which are water, sewer, electric, and garbage, solid waste. End of the year at 17.1 million, up a little bit from the prior year at 16.7. And then I'm just showing you the operating revenues and operating expenditures of each fund. The next page just shows that unrestricted governmental funds. Again, that should jump up quite a bit in 2022. The next page, I'm just showing you your governmental revenue sources by fiscal year. We're going all the way back to 2008. If I'd gone back another year, I would have gotten 15 on the handout. You can see by your general property taxes have been increasing over this look back period from about $6.5 million to just over $9 million. But do keep in mind, this is a 14-year period, so that's not a huge increase on an annualized basis, particularly when you consider compounding. The next row I'll talk a little bit about is the kind of the red line about halfway down the page. Those are other local taxes, and you can see it really jumped in 2008, 2009. We were over 4 million. This year in 2021 was the first year we got back over 4 million after the Great Recession. And I believe some of that change was because revenue for Pulaski County was accidentally being credited to Radford at the state, and so they took away money for a period of time. Nonetheless, those are real dollars to you. So we are up in 2021. If memory serves, I want to say that's because internet sales now are being allocated to Radford. The big spike on that, the next line down, that's going to be federal aid. You did receive about $2.4 million in CARES Act money, that's the reason for that increase. But you can see, by just by looking at this, really the revenues that are growing and the ones that are more or less stagnant, a lot of them are pretty flat, of course, with the exception of the few. But I am glad to see some increase in other local taxes. And again, that's going to be meals, sales, lodging, those locally generated taxes. The next page is just graphing out that net position for the enterprise funds, water, sewer, electric, and solid waste. And it's maintaining. We had a decrease there in the electric fund, but that kind of stabilized this year. Again, probably largely because you just didn't transfer much money out of the electric fund over to general fund.
And some of that is reflective of where we have fewer students with the electric piece as well, correct? Yeah.
The next page, I'm just graphing out the electric fund revenue, operating revenues and operating expenditures. And the thing to really look at here is you really haven't had much growth in expenditures either over the period of time. You know, normally you would expect to see about a 2 or 3% annualized increase just because of inflation. But you can see your operating expenses for the electric fund are actually less than they were back in 2010. So I guess inflation hasn't found its way to the electric fund just yet. No, but that just gives us an indication that those operating costs are being held in check. And just assessed values. I'm just looking at the real estate personal property assessments, and just to see how they're trending. You can see the one that's trending downwards, machinery and tools, probably primarily due to the foundry when they left or when they closed up. This goes all the way back to 2001, so we've got 20 years or 21 years here. But you can see real estate, personal property are the two that are growing. Public Service Corporation is growing a little bit. Again, real estate, we have to divide that by 10 so we can get it on the page with all the other assessments. So just keep that in mind as you look at this. So instead of 80 million in real estate assessment, it's really 800 million.
Personal property and stagnant because they just haven't, the new vehicles aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you may actually see an increase in personal property assessments this year. I don't know if you have yet or not, maybe next year, because of the value has been going up, even for used cars and definitely for new cars. The next couple pages were our management recommendations. I won't go through all of these, but we do like to provide them to you just in case you have any questions.
Could I have a question on the MT and furniture one? It's going down. At the same time, we're automating, we're doing a lot more robotics and so on in our manufacturing. Of course, that impacts our number of employees that we employ and so on. And so we're getting a double whammy on that. Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. As you have automation should be driving, it should be cool stuff.
It should be going up because I see our people, our companies in the city are investing a lot in robotics and automation.
What you might want to do, and I don't know how often those are selected for audit, but you might want to have the commissioner go out and talk to some of those companies to make sure they're reporting the correct amounts.
Yes, I think so. Because I know several of the companies, I won't mention them, but that they have just invested very heavily in automation.
I'm sorry, we can't hear anything.
Your
that
mic's not on, I don't think, David.
David says.
So we're talking about the revenue line on the combination of all the different assessed values, the MT and furniture and fixtures. And that's basically talking about where automation should be driving that line a little bit higher as people add additional pieces of equipment. And we were saying that may have to be audited at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And what we've seen, and I'll expand a little bit. What we've seen is there are consulting groups that go out and help industry revise their tax returns or help them file their tax returns. And sometimes they don't necessarily know what's going to be what should be taxed as machinery and tools and what should not. So it's not a bad idea on some of these larger companies to see if the commissioner can take a staff person or two and head out and see what they're doing. I know that like packaging equipment is not subject to machinery and tools tax. So a lot of companies will say the conveyor belt that goes from final point of production to the packaging equipment would not be included, even though it may be a $2 million piece of equipment.
But it should be.
It should be, and you have to go into rulings to determine. The state tax commissioner has all sorts of rulings on their website, and you can use those rulings to more or less tell you what needs to be included.
We need to look into that, I think, in some depth, because as I say, it's a double whammy. The more they automate, and we want them to be efficient and effective and make a profit and everything. But then the number of employees that get employed goes down because we don't need that many.
Well, and we have a variety of things coming online this year with new manufacturing, things like that. So we can
Yeah,
take a look at that.
It's not a
Okay.
bad idea. There are groups out there, and we've helped a couple commissioners kind of review assessments or review the reports that have been submitted. And there are groups out there that work on not us, but the groups out there that work on a contingent fee. So they'll go into an industry and say, if I can lower your tax bill by $1 million, will you give me 10%? They do that by reducing what they reported to the local government. Sometimes correctly and sometimes
Right.
incorrectly. I don't want to say.
Can you go into a little more detail on the fire program funds on page 8?
Yeah, on the fire program fund, so every year you get a little bit of money from the state for fire programs, and every year you turn around and send a report back to them on how that money was spent. Right now, you're saying you've been just accumulating money. There are a lot of things that are eligible costs for those funds. I think you've probably actually spent that money. We just need to go back, and somebody needs to go through and report that to the state.
But we got a lot of carryover there.
That's a lot of carryover,
That's
and I think you purchased a fire truck, and I do know other localities use debt service on their fire trucks they apply this money against that debt service.
Are there consequences to or to having too much carryover from the state that we might be experiencing if they don't realize that it's spent?
Not in this fund. What we'd hope to do is accumulate it because the next fire truck is about $700,000. So we want to be able to pay cash for that versus having to finance it. So that's why it's been building up. We do have the option of paying the debt service on the 2018 or whatever it is, but just been doing that through regular general fund and accumulating this money rather than go out and bond the money for the next fire truck.
But we're still 2 to 3 years away from that fire.
Couple
truck.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
I mean, I would try to, if you've got eligible costs anyway, I think I would probably just go ahead and try to apply this against those eligible costs. Then it's not designated on your balance sheet anymore.
Okay.
Kind of a similar thing with the highway funding program. What we kind of looked at that in depth this year. That's on page 9. You get money from the state every year, and we think you've incurred some cost. You have a highway fund to track all the expenditures. We think you've incurred some costs outside of that fund that are eligible. You've also had some costs inside that fund that probably weren't eligible. So just go through and kind of review the accounting in that fund and in your general fund and your capital projects fund to make sure you're reporting everything that you've actually spent on your roads.
Is this another one where we've saved some money because like the Tyler to East Main project?
Bridge
and
project.
Bridge project? Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Getting-
do have a
getting ready
couple
to
of
spend it.
projects that are the same kind of thing that we know we've got the upcoming expense, so.
And you can certainly do that. I've always wondered, and we've never had the state come back and ask for any of that money back for the fire program funds or the highway maintenance funds. But we do have some places that have really large balances of highway maintenance funds. And we're concerned that one day the state's going to say, look, you're not spending the money we sent you. We're going to cut your allocation or send it back. So that's my only concern, and that's probably not well-founded, but just a fear of mine. Pages 10, really.
Well, before we do that, let's touch on this next item, the overall reconciliation of accounting systems. This is something that's been discussed for many, many years. Would you like to go into a little detail about it? Then we can talk about that for a second.
Yeah, it's been out there forever. Yeah, that's something the city, I understand they're still working towards it. I don't know how soon the treasurer's office is going to come on board.
What's the attitude of the treasurer's office at
It
this
was
point?
supposed to be by the end of the month, and there was a technical glitch with the Munis company. I think it's now going to be April, but it is going to be over with this year.
Oh, that's great.
Good.
I think.
Well, it's been something we've wanted to have done for a long, long, long time, and it's something that's well past
You
due.
know, it's been a comment so long that the first comment is no longer subject to the Retention Act. So we threw
Right.
that one away. But it's been a comment for a long time. It's something you need to do, and it's creating more work.
Double
frankly.
work.
It's just not an efficient way to run a city. The next couple pages really 10 through the rest of the report. That's our letter to those charged with governance. If we had any problems during the audit, significant problems, we'll report those to you here. We also provide a copy of all the adjusting entries that we recommended as part of the audit. You guys get a clean bill of health. We didn't have any issues. And really what this is to report is if we come in to do an audit, and this happens on occasion, and somebody's just not forthcoming, they don't provide documents, they're cantankerous, if you will, that's where it gets reported in this letter. But you get a clean bill of health. When we asked for something, we got it. You know, there was nobody holding any information back that we're aware of.
So a couple of
just-
quick things before we get toward that last little bit. As you say, clean bill of health. As we look at things, the one big issue that has been a giant spotlight has been our unrestricted reserves.
Yes.
And that number is significantly lower this year, although we've addressed that a couple of times, that we're likely to take some of the ARP money and move that into that category, and that will likely be at least where we were or above. From looking at that and looking at our revenue sources and everything along that line, from an accounting audit place, is there anything that looks out of balance or inappropriate for what we need to do to maintain the city? As we talked about, the property taxes have seen an increase both in terms of rate and evaluation. The sales and meals tax has seen an increase. So those are two of the ones that we mainly can control through things like that. But are there other recommendations related to that for the fiscal health of the city?
You know, about all you can do, and something I should have done, and I didn't do it, was to look at kind of the average annual increase in your expenditures going back, 10 or 15 years. Of course, that gets skewed a little bit because transit has come on in that period of time. But really, the only thing, I mean, you have two options. You can try to raise more revenue or reduce expenditures, and that's really it at the end of the day. I don't expect, once we get past ARPA, I don't expect there'll be a whole lot of federal funding out there because we're going to have to pay for all this somehow. So I think federal funding, similar to back in 2008, when we had a lot of federal funding after the Great Recession, it kind of died off and it went flat. And it was flat for 10 years until the coronavirus showed up. So that lack of federal funding affects you directly, but it kind of also affects you indirectly, because that means the state might not be getting the same federal dollars that they were getting years ago. So I think, you know, and I say this in just about every locality, you wind up relying more and more on local dollars. And that means you have to raise, you know, unfortunately, you have to raise taxes. You know, the example is your expenses go up by 3%. Federal and state revenue is half of your budget. It does not go up at all. That means taxes have to go up by 6% to compensate. And that's kind of where we are. And particularly post-ARPA, you can use that to build fund balance. It's a one-time shot. I don't think we're going to have it. Past that, it's going to be tough.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Can I just go back a little bit on the capital assets? I know that the GIS system, I understand our intern that we had working on that, we've just made a permanent hire. And that they're working on really mapping the entire city on the GIS. Is that correct? And that's going to really, I think, be a big thing for us.
Part-time hire.
Part-time hire.
It's part-time hire. You two part-time hires.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So that's going along very well, isn't it?
Very good.
And that's going to really have an effect on how we are able to look at our primary land holdings.
That's mapping some things we haven't had a whole lot of good information on,
That's
stormwater
right.
systems and sanitary.
How many years since we've had a mapping? I hate to say.
Corbin, what else do you have for us?
Well, I was going to say as a follow-up to his comment on capital assets, you may want to use the GIS system, because really what we have now is we have all these assets listed that don't have a great description on them in your fixed asset software.
Right.
You may be able to use the GIS system at least to kind of clean up some of the.
That's
real
what I'm
estate.
thinking.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that's a good point.
Corbin, you might mention a little bit, since the restricted fund has gotten larger, you might talk a little bit about that. It's got some
Oh,
bond
yeah.
money in it, just because it's a larger number, if that's on y'all's minds. I know it was a question that I got a couple things I briefed council kind of leading up to this meeting, but that might be a good point to hear it from you.
Issued, was it 13 or 17 million dollars for the school board?
Yeah, about 14.
14. So essentially those restricted fund balances there on page 1, essentially those are, and I'll flip back, essentially those restricted fund balance on page 1, those are the unspent, to a large degree. The bulk of that is going to be unspent bond proceeds that are, you have to use them for the school. And that's why you've got the big increase there. So it's odd, but in governmental accounting, fund balance, if you issue that in 1 year, your fund balance goes up. If you spend it the next year, your fund balance goes down. So they don't necessarily happen the same year. And it gets carried over. We do carry it over as restricted because it is restricted.
Right. Yep.
And that'll still be a fairly high number in the FY22 audit, but then it's going to drop off substantially by the time he does 23, because the bond money will all be gone.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And the project will be done.
Yes.
So the project will be done.
And the only other thing I'll mention, it was in the box that I gave David. I have a handout with all the new accounting standards. So if anyone wants that, I think it's 7 or 8 pages. If you're having trouble sleeping tonight, but it does let you know that you've got some new standards coming up that are going to impact your financial statement.
Anything else we need to be keeping in mind as we take a look at all of this?
That my contact information is right on the front page. And I'm here to serve the council. So I welcome emails, phone calls. You have any questions, don't hesitate to call me. I'm here to help you, and you don't have to worry about getting a bill the next day.
Well, we appreciate that. I always look at these get-togethers as a chance for us to talk through some of the difficult things that we need to talk through, to see if there's anything that we're not doing that we should be doing. Certainly this switch over to everybody being on Munis is a huge thing that finally will get taken care of this year, and we'll go from there. And then addressing our unrestricted fund is something we're going to have to continue to keep an eye on. So that's something that's crucial there. Thank you for the work that you've done to help identify any issues and help us think with the things we need to think about. I do want to go around the horn real quick to see if anybody has anything that they want to talk about so we don't get too late before we wrap everything up. Naomi, did you have any questions or comments?
I don't have any other questions. Thank you very much, Corbin.
Okay. Forrest, since you're remote, do you have any other questions or comments?
Not for me tonight, but thanks for coming out, Corbin. Appreciate it.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Jesse, do you have anything?
I think it's pretty clear. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Harshberg.
Just one thing, the required supplementary information, the RSI. You don't touch that in your audit.
Right, in an audit, most of that information, it's provided by the state. So the required supplementary information, which is going to be pension funding information, what the liabilities are, what they have been over a period of time. All that information is provided by the state. The only.
Is that true, the introduction of statistical
Right,
information?
We don't make sure the MD&A, which is part of the introduction, we do review it and we recommend changes.
You
to
do,
it,
okay.
But we don't make sure that everything is factual within that narrative. And it's just a narrative up front.
Do you have any problem with that?
No, I didn't have any problem with it. I mean, we did recommend some changes, but they were just either typo or this number's transposed or something.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
The only other thing that I didn't mention that obviously inflation is starting to show itself. So that's the other thing you're going to be dealing with. I don't know when I don't think it's going to continue at the current rate. I think it will settle down. I don't know what it'll settle down to, but you're going to be dealing with that for the next several.
I think related to that, when we did our bonding and our refinancing, we did it at a really, really good time because we're not likely to see that occur. And those you can recall, this book used to be thinner, and now that you have all of the pension, and before Corbin comes in, there's a evaluation that we have to do, an audit of all of the the pension programs, things like that go into number of employees, all that goes into that middle section of this. That's about 15 pages, now 15 or 20 pages of the audit.
Yeah, we're up to 161 pages.
Woo!
Wow.
Audit grows
Soon
each
we'll be
time.
approaching War and Peace.
Oh, yeah.
With this, as your firm does audits of other localities, municipalities, how are we looking in terms of our peers?
Cities in general have a difficult time because you can no longer annex, frankly.
What's that?
Cities in general are having a difficult time because you can no longer annex. So you can't grow your boundaries. So what happens as you have aging infrastructure that you've got to repair, replace, and that sort of thing, we don't have a growing tax base. So I think that's the biggest challenge I see. So counties actually are faring much better than cities right now. And then we've noticed that for the last 5 or 10 years. If you pick up Roanoke City's financial statements or Roanoke County, pretty quickly you can tell who's doing that.
Okay. Well, any other questions or concerns? I think we're good. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the work you've done. Thank you for keeping us straight. And hopefully when we get together next year, even though it may be something we've noticed, we will have gotten past our dual systems. We'll have moved ARPA money over, and we'll deal with whatever else the problem is at that time.
Let's give them a hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, that went a little quicker than I thought it might. David, do you have any comment that you want to make before we wrap this portion up?
No, as you all know, the budget and finances and audit are near and dear to my heart. We want to have, provide the best services that we can at the lowest possible cost. So we're always constantly reviewing expenses. As Corbin said, we keep our expenses low. That's been helpful. That's also helped generate a lower property tax. Your property taxes have gone up really based on expenses associated with school construction. I mean, we look back at history. I think one of the most interesting parts of the financial statements, other than the first few pages where you're looking at what's coming, look at the back and it gives you a history of taxes, revenue taxes, meals, sales, lodging, those kinds of things. I think it's interesting to look at that history. There's a lot of good information at the back, and then also gives you a summary of bond information. It gives you a summary of all of our any of our debt that's owed, those kinds of things. So the audit is a very good educational piece. I think you learn a lot from the audit. And of course, this is the number one building block in which we go into next year's budget. So that'll be the next step forward as we're still in those COVID times, trying to predict what we've done this past year without an audited year, and then going forward into our FY23 budget development. But we've held our own. We continue to be concerned over that general fund. We've gotten it as high as $3.5 million about 4 or 5 years ago. We dropped down during that recession period, and we were coming back until COVID hit. So hopefully we'll be able to, with the ARPA monies and the designation there of the lost revenue, we'll be able to bump that number up some and maintain it as we hopefully see those 5 or 6 categories continue to grow as we advance. Seen some really positive things for FY22. $40 million in building permits, and a number of these things we're already seeing grow in the first 6 months of the fiscal year. And once those start opening up in the calendar year 22, I think it's going to be very, very positive for us. So I think that's the main things. Callista, can you think of anything else? Corbin does a great job. We always appreciate him coming and his wisdom. He's helped us guide through some of the ARPA stuff. And I guess, Corbin, it might be good to say one of the things, as in transit and with some of the CDBG and other things that we do special audit on, the ARPA monies will be special audit. They'll be subject to the special audit provisions coming forward. So that's throughout the country. So good luck, Corbin.
Alyssa, do you have anything you want to share?
Reassessment next year.
Well, and that's something that it's its whole challenge in itself, because with runaway home prices and assessments and things like that, we also want to be sensitive to those that haven't necessarily experienced that kind of windfall financially and how that can impact them. But one of the things, Corbin, that you mentioned that I think is important for us to think about as we look at where we've been and where we're going, this ARPA money is a real good example that it's a one-time thing that bucket won't be refilled. It can help us in a lot of ways, but it can also be a building block for other forms of revenue, depending on how we invest it.
That's right.
And I think that's something we have to think about and be very conscious about. The easy thing is to say, well, let's just use it for some of these expenses and get that off of the slate. And, it takes care of it for this year and next year. But then when that's gone, that's gone. But if it's been invested in a way that can grow the meals and sales tax or grow the property tax through development of other areas and things like that, then that provides us with a basis to go much longer and to grow much longer. So those are just some things, and I'm just bringing this up, Council, because I think these will be some of the guiding principles as we look at our budgeting this next year and as we move forward with that. Keep that in mind, that those are some of our challenges, but those are also some of our opportunities. And we go from there.
And I think, as you mentioned, Mayor, and I think just expand on that a little further, I think one of the things from your retreat and what you were all looking at, you're looking at a variety of things. You're looking at quality of life, you're looking at public safety, and then you're looking at your investments in economic development. that are going to generate those dollars. So I think you have a nice, good mix of how you're going to spend, that $8.2 million. Once we get the second drop of that in hopefully June of this year, how you spend that money going forward. So.
Sounds good. Anything else from anybody? All right, we will go on and adjourn for about 20 minutes and we'll get back together at 7 o'clock. Thank you all very much.